Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav and we'll be learning today Miras Hashem Daf Kuf Zayin Amid Beis. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Sukkah and we pick up today on near the bottom of Kuf Zayin Amid Aleph, 2 lines off the bottom, Kuf Zayin Amid Aleph in Siman Tuf Reish Mem in the middle of Siv Daled. So the Mechaber began Siv Daled by saying Mitztayer Potter Min HaSukkah, the famous Ptur, somebody who's Mitztayer, somebody who is suffering. He's in tsar due to the sitting in the sukkah or sleeping in the sukkah. The act of being in the sukkah, of eating in the sukkah or sleeping in the sukkah is giving him tsar. So he's a mitztar. Mitztar is potter min sukkah. And the reason mitztar is potter min sukkah, the Mishnah Berurah told us a nice cut in Yud Gimel, is the ke'ein taduru be'inan. Like we've said many times, the chiyuv of sukkah is teishvu ke'ein taduru. You're supposed to live in the sukkah, teishvu ke'ein taduru, similar to the way you live in your house. And like the Chavetz Chaim said, it's cut in Yud Gimel, va'af b'chol hashana, all year round, ein adam dar b'makom shehu mitztar. You don't live in a house that's causing you tsar. If for some reason the house is causing you tsar, if there's a major leak in the house and the water is pouring on your head, you get out. You don't stay there. If it's impossible to sleep in the house because of a terrible smell, you leave the house. So in your sukkah, if you're mitztar, you have a ptur from the sukkah because that's not teshvu ke'ein toduru. So that was the beginning of Siv Daled. Now we are 2 lines from the bottom in the middle of the line, where the Mechaber is now going to start defining what does this mean mitztar. Ezehu mitztar. What's called mitztar? Says the Mechaber, Zeh she'ena yochal lishain basukkah. Let's say somebody cannot sleep in the sukkah. Let's remember, we said that one of the primary chiyuvim of sukkah is sleeping in the sukkah. We have identified the primary chiyuvim of the sukkah, the primary ways one lives in his dira, eating, drinking, and sleeping. We've already had the Ramah that discusses why people seem to be makel nowadays on sleeping. We had various reasons, but we always do talk about sleeping in the sukkah as one of the primary chiyuvim of sukkah. And the Mechaber uses sleeping over here as the example of mitztar. Somebody cannot sleep in the sukkah. She'ena yachal lishain basukkah, he can't sleep in the sukkah mipnei ruach, because of the wind. It's very windy and the wind is getting into the sukkah, it's blowing all over him, it's blowing things around. He can't sleep. Ay mipnei hazvuvim, or maybe there are flies. Va'paroshim, or I think paroshim literally are fleas, but these are various types of insects. If you can't sleep in the sukkah because every other minute you're getting bitten by mosquitoes, you can't sleep in the sukkah, you're mitztar. So if you're mitztar, mipnei ruach, mipnei azvuvim, v'haparoshim, v'kayoytze behem, or anything similar, ay mipnei hareach, or because there's a terrible odor. So again, the Mechaber is using over here the example of somebody sleeping in the sukkah. Somebody goes to sleep in the sukkah and he can't sleep, either because of the winds, or because of insects, or because of a terrible smell. He can't sleep in the sukkah, he's a mitztar, and he's potter, he's allowed to leave the sukkah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ice cotton tezayin, excuse me. Ice cotton tezayin, 2 lines off the bottom of the page in the Mishnah Berurah. Zeh she'ena yochal lishain. The Chavetz Chaim points out, don't think that when the Mechaber chose to use sleeping to discuss the halacha of mitztar, he's limiting this discussion of mitztar to the question of sleeping in the sukkah. V'hu adin de mitztar potter b'kulan. A mitztar is potter from any of the activities that you are normally chayiv to do in the sukkah. Af me'achila. You're also potter from achila in the sukkah, from eating in the sukkah, if somehow eating in the sukkah is going to make you a mitztar. Or Ritzainam Loimar, he's saying this over for the Achrayim, and he's pointing out the intent of the Achrayim, the kavanah of the Achrayim when they say this is, or Ritzainam Loimar, Deim haruach v'reach, if the wind or the smell, ukahai gavna, or anything of the like, let's say insects, let's say bees and mosquitoes, mitzarim le ba'achila, are giving you tremendous tsar when you're trying to eat, potter af me'achila, then you're potter from eating in the sukkah. It's well known, at least around these parts, very often Sukkah's time, there are a lot of bees in the sukkah. many people, it doesn't faze them. It doesn't bother them. There are some people who apparently can't get over it. They can't take it. The bees are buzzing around. They're afraid of them. Everything else, they can't take it. If you're mamish mitzvah, if you would leave your dining room because there are bees buzzing around in the dining room, then you're mitzvah. You could leave the sukkah because of that tsar. So the point of the Mishnah Berurah over here is the Mechaber defines mitzvah and he only speaks about sleeping. So the Chavetz Chaim brings from the Achronim, it's not relegated, this whole discussion is not relegated only to sleeping. The discussion of mitzvah is also pertinent to eating in the sukkah. Pater af me'achila. Aval im hatzar rak b'shena. But if the problem over here is one that only applies to sleeping, if the tsar is one which is only the gad to sleeping. Let's say, for example, you have electric lights on in the sukkah, and somebody set a Shabbos clock, and the lights are supposed to go off at night so that you could sleep in the sukkah, and somebody goofed, and the Shabbos clock didn't get set. And now all the lights are going to stay on in the sukkah, and you're somebody who can't sleep with the light on. So then the lights that are on are making you a mitzvah only in the context of Shina. They're certainly not making you a mitzvah in the context of Akila. So you have a p'tur, you're exempt from sleeping in the sukkah because you're a mitzvah, but you're not potter from eating in the sukkah. The lights aren't making you mitzvah in the context of eating. Aval rak b'shena, if the tsar only applies to sleeping, chayiv ba'achila, you still have a chayiv to eat in the sukkah. Ois cotton yud zayin. Another example that the Mechaber gave over here was a smell. Oy mipnei hareach. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Ayin le'el simin taf reish chav tes sif yodalid. The Mishnah Berurah sends us back to simin taf reish chav tes sif yodalid, where we learned the halacha that even though smelly schach is not strictly speaking pasal midaraisa, it could be perfectly kosher as schach, even though it smells terrible. Ein l'sachech. The Chachamim said you're not allowed to be misachech your sukkah with malodorous schach because of a fear that it might bring you taka to leave the sukkah. So you're not allowed to use that kind of schach. Over Mishnah Berurah Sham, and he tells us to take a look at the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Lamed Ches, where the Mishnah Berurah points out that if the smell of the schach is so bad that ein adam sevlasai, a person mamish can't take it, you can gag from the smell, then it's possible that the sukkah is even pasal min haTorah. Uber Sibit Tafresh Lamed Sif Aleph of the Mishnah Berurah Sham, where the Mechaber and the Mishnah Berurah discuss over there that you also shouldn't use something that's very malodorous for the walls of the sukkah for all of the same reasons. Ula'el b'simen ayin tes Sif Katan Chav Gimel b'Mishnah Berurah. I believe that is a reference to other things that you're not allowed to do in the presence of very malodorous substances. Okay. Now, the last word of the Shulchan Aruch, the last word of the Mechaber on Kuf Zayin Amud Aleph, the Mechaber says, and this is going to get very interesting, V'dafka, and now we turn to Kuf Zayin Amud Beis in the Shulchan Aruch, V'dafka shebaloi hatzar b'mikreh. The Mechaber is pointing out to you over here, when we say that there's a p'tur of mitzvah, when is there a p'tur of mitzvah? That's v'dafka shebaloi hatzar b'mikreh. That's when this thing that's being mitzvah you just happened. It just happened to happen now. Achar she'asa sham hasukah. After you went and you made a sukkah. You made what seemed to be a perfectly kosher sukkah. Now something happened b'mikreh that is causing you to be a mitzvah, and now you have a p'tur of mitzvah b'sukkah. Avol, however, says the Mechaber contrasts this to another case. Avol, however, ein loy lasai sukkasai lechatchila b'mkaim hareach oy haruach. Don't go ahead and make your sukkah lechatchila b'mkaim hareach. Don't go ahead and make your sukkah right next to the septic tank, or to the cesspit, to the cesspool. Don't go ahead and make your sukkah in a very malodorous place. Oy haruach. Don't go ahead and make your sukkah bedafka in a place where it's excessively windy. V'loymar mitzdarani, and then try to go ahead and claim that you have a p'tur of mitzdar. The p'tur of mitzdar is pshat that you have a perfectly kosher sukkah. You have a perfectly usable sukkah. Now something happened. Like I said, the lights got left on. So now you're a mitzvah. When it comes to sleeping in the sukkah, you have a ptur. You made a perfectly good, perfectly kosher sukkah. Now it just happens to be b'mikreh that the wind tonight picked up very excessively. There's a hurricane barreling down the coast, and it's very, very windy, and you can't use the sukkah because of the wind. So now you have a ptur of mitzvah. But to go ahead and make the sukkah in an oifen where you know you're going to be a mitzvah, that the Mechaber is saying there's no ptur of mitzvah. That's what the Mechaber says. Now let's take a look at what the Ramah says. Continues the Ramah, and the Ramah builds upon these words of the Mechaber. And the Ramah says, Hagah, V'im asa mitchila b'makom shemitztar. If you went ahead and you made the sukkah mitchila, you initially went ahead and made a sukkah in a place where you're going to be mitzvah, ba'achila, when you try to eat in the sukkah, ay b'shtia, or when you try to drink in the sukkah, ay b'shena, or when you try to sleep in the sukkah, ay she'i efshar lo lasos echad mehem b'sukkah, or let's say you made a sukkah where it's impossible for you to do one of these activities in the sukkah. It's impossible for you to eat in the sukkah, drink in the sukkah, or sleep in the sukkah. Machmas de misyare melistim oy ganovim kishuhu b'sukkah. Because you went ahead and you made a sukkah smack in the middle of the Rishus HaRabim. You went ahead in front of your house and you plunked down a sukkah with no locks, with no anything else, right in a busy place where people come and go, where there's all sorts of people walking by, and now you say, well, I can't sleep in the sukkah. Who knows who's going to walk in on me on the sukkah at 3 o'clock in the morning? I can't sleep in the sukkah. So that means you went ahead and you made a sukkah mitchila that is not roi for one of the uses of sukkah. You went ahead and you made a sukkah that's not roi for shina. You made a sukkah that's not usable for sleep. Says the Ramah, Eino yoytze ba'oisa sukkah klal. You cannot be yoytze the mitzvah of sukkah with that sukkah at all. Afilu b'dvarim shaloi mitzvah behem. Even with a type of activity in the sukkah where you have no tsar. So what's he saying? He's saying if you made a sukkah that for whatever reason it's not possible for you to sleep in that sukkah because of mitzvah, you made a sukkah with lights, with blasting lights, where there's no option to have them turned off or covered or anything else, and you're a guy who cannot sleep in the sukkah with light. So that means that you made a sukkah b'tchila, where you're going to turn around and say, I'm potter from sleeping in the sukkah because of mitzvah. Says the Ramah, Azaz sukkah, you're not even yoytze to eat in that sukkah. Why? Because it's not a sukkah. Because you didn't make a sukkah that's Teshvu Kein Taduru. Now, the Ramah, if you see here in the parentheses, the Ramah is bringing this from a Mordechai in Perek HaYoshem. The words of the Mordechai are, he says, when is there a ptur of mitzvah? V'davka she'asa sukkasai mitchila b'makam harotli lecha v'lishtois v'lishan ba. If you made a sukkah in a place where it's roi, where it's a sukkah that could be used for eating, drinking, and sleeping, then v'noilad lo yatzar acharkach, and then something happened which now is going to cause you to be mitzvah. So like I said, you made what seemed to be a perfectly good sukkah. Now the wind became very strong. You went ahead, you made what seemed to be a very good sukkah. Now it turns out that the lights are going to be on. You made what seemed to be a very normal, good sukkah, and suddenly it became 110 degrees outside, and you're mitzvah because of a tremendous amount of heat. So in that case, you have a ptur of mitzvah. Aval, however, says the Mordechai, if you made a sukkah in a place where you're gonna be mitzvah to eat in it, or you're drinking, you made your sukkah in a place right next to a septic tank. So you made your sukkah in a place where it is going to smell terrible. So it's not roy lachila ufishtia oibishina. Then says the Mordechai, loy mibaya deloy niftar ba. Not only do you not have a ptur Ela afilu ein sakana ba'achilu ushtia ela b'shina. If you made a sukkah where there's a sakana, there's a danger because of ganavim and listim and bad guys, but that sakana is only at night when you're sleeping. But that sakana is not during the day when you eat. But you made the sukkah in such a place where there is a sakana mamish at night to sleep in. So then the Mordechai says, Lo yotza yidei chavase klala filu ba'achila. Then you're not even yotzei the mitzvah of sukkah to eat in that sukkah during the day. Why? D'ha ke'ein dira be'inon. Because your chiyuv is to make a sukkah that's teshvu ke'ein taduru. And the Mordechai ends off and he says, Lo yahav your sukkah. This sukkah that you made is not a sukkah. Kevan de l'tzeurei kaima. Because this is a sukkah that mitchila is a sukkah where you're going to be mitzvah. A sukkah that you built mitchilasai in an oifen where you are going to be mitzvah, you didn't build a sukkah. Your chiyuv of making a sukkah is teishu kein taduru. You didn't go ahead and make a teishu kein taduru sukkah. Now you want to go ahead and eat in this sukkah? You can't eat in this sukkah. This sukkah is not a teishu kein taduru sukkah. It doesn't meet the requirements of a sukkah. A sukkah has a requirement of teishu kein taduru. If you cannot sleep in the sukkah, then it's not a teishu kein taduru sukkah. If it's not a teishu kein taduru sukkah, you can't use it to eat in it either. So says the Mordechai, and that's where the Ramah is coming from over here. Now, before we go into what seems to be the huge kasha on this Ramah and the challenge posed by this Ramah, let's take a look over here at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut in Yud Ches. Oy b'sheina. If you made a sukkah mitchila in a place and in an oifen where you're going to be mitzvah if you want to sleep in the sukkah, pirush, the Mishnah Chaim says this means b'mokoim delekat tzina. You live in a locale where it's not cold. V'atzaru machmas haruach v'tiyoytza bazeh. And now you have tsar because of wind, the canal. The truth is, all right, I have to back up. The Ramah, again, what did the Ramah tell me here? The Ramah said over here, if you make a sukkah, mitchila, where you know you're going to be mitzvah from one of the primary uses of the sukkah, achila, shti, or shina, then that sukkah is a possible sukkah and you can't use it for anything. If you know you're not going to be able to sleep in this sukkah because of mitzvah, then it's not a kosher sukkah for achila, shti either, because it's not a sukkah. Now the problem is, and this Mishnah Berurah Cut Yud Ches is really coming to answer this question. The problem is that there seems to be a steer in the Ramah. The Ramah is telling me straight out over here, if you make a sukkah that's not roy for sleeping because of mitzvah, then you can't use that sukkah to eat in it during the day either. Now the problem with that is, let's go back to Siman Tov Reish Lamed Tes. If we go back to Siman Tov Reish Lamed Tes, Kuf Daled Amid Aleph, Siman Tov Reish Lamed Tes in Siv Beis, in the Ramah, the famous Ramah that we spoke about at length, where the Ramah speaks about why people are makel on sleeping in the sukkah. What did the Ramah say? The Ramah said, "Umashe noyegin lahakel akshav b'shina." This that people are makel nowadays when it comes to the question of sleeping in the sukkah. She'ein yishein b'sukkah raka medaktik in mitzvahs. It seems that only the ones that are really medaktik b'mitzvahs sleep in the sukkah. Yesh oimrim mishum tzina. There are those that say that the reason is because of the cold. The yesh tsar lishain b'mekaymei sakarim. Because it's mitzvah in the locales where the climate is very cold. To sleep in the sukkah, you're a mitzvah. And mitzvah is pater min sukkah. And take a look who the Ramah brings this down from. He brings it down from the Mordechai in Perek HaYoshen. He brings it down from the Mordechai in Masechta Sukkah, Siman Tov Shin Mem Aleph. So the Mordechai in Siman Tov Shin Mem Aleph says, you know why people are makel when it comes to sleeping in the sukkah? Because they have a p'tur of mitzvah. Why do they have a p'tur of mitzvah? Because it's very cold. They live in cold climates. It's cold. They have a p'tur of mitzvah. That's what the Mordechai says in Siman Tov Shin Mem Aleph. But over here today on Kuf Zayin Amid Beis in Siman Taf Reish Mem, we're also coming from the Mordechai, and we're coming from the Mordechai right before that Mordechai. We're coming from the Mordechai in Siman Taf Shin Mem. And what does that Mordechai say? That Mordechai says, you make a sukkah where mitchila you're going to have a ptur of mitzvah. You can't sleep in the sukkah because of mitzvah. That sukkah is possible and you're not even allowed to eat in that sukkah. Well, wait a second. In Taf Reish Lamed Tes, you told me I can make a sukkah, I can eat in that sukkah, I could drink in that sukkah, and I'm potter from sleeping in the sukkah because it's cold and I'm mitzvah. But wait a second. If you live in a cold climate and you know it's going to get cold at night, and you made a sukkah that you can't sleep in because of mitzvah, doesn't the Mordechai say in Taf Shin Mem that then that sukkah is a possible sukkah and you can't even eat in that sukkah? So there seems to be a steer over here in the Ramah. Not only is it a steer in the Ramah, it's not really a steer in the Ramah, it's a steer in the Mordechai. The Ramah is not coming from himself. The Ramah in both places, in Taf Reish Lamed Tes and Taf Reish Mem, in both places the Ramah is coming from the Mordechai. So don't we have a steer over here in the Mordechai? And this is the question that the Mishnah Berurah is coming to answer over here in Ois Katan Yud Ches. In Ois Katan Yud Ches, the Chavetz Chaim says like this. The Ramah says, and again he's coming from the Mordechai, that if you make your sukkah mitchila, if you go ahead and you make a sukkah where you're going to be mitztar b'shina, then that sukkah is possible and you can't even use it for achila. Says the Mishnah Berurah is Katan Yud Ches, Pirush. What does this mean? That you made a sukkah mitchila, where you're going to be mitztar b'shina, oy b'shina, pirush b'makam delekatzina. We're not talking about a place where it's cold outside. If it's a place where it's cold outside, that's going to be a different halacha that we'll discuss soon, says the Chavetz Chaim. That's not what the Ramah means here, when he says that you made a sukkah mitchila where you're mitztar because of shina, because of sleeping. You can't sleep in the sukkah because you're a mitzvah. He doesn't mean in a cold climate. That's not what he means. What he means is v'atzaru machmas haruach. He is talking about here a different tsar. You live in a place where it's windy, but you could protect yourself from the wind. You could make the sukkah on the other side of a wall where there's a wall blocking the wind. Or you can make a four-walled sukkah where the walls of the sukkah will keep out the wind and you made a three-wall sukkah. So there's a problem of ruach. And you went ahead and you made a sukkah that's exposed to the ruach. The ilu b'mekaymai sakarim. Because if we're talking about a cold climate, if we're talking about a locale that's in a cold climate, yoytze yedeicha vasei ba'achila. We're not going to say that you're potter from sleeping in the sukkah because of mitzvah, because of the cold, and therefore the sukkah is possible even for achila. No. When it comes to the question of a cold climate, you're potter at night because of mitzvah, and you still are yoitza during the day for achila. Why? Even though you can't sleep there. This halacha of the Ramah here on Kuf Zayin Amid Beis doesn't apply to that case. If you make your sukkah where it's exposed to the ruach, or if you make your sukkah right next to a cesspool in a very malodorous place, then you made a deficient sukkah. You made a sukkah where you're going to be mitzvah, and therefore you cannot use that sukkah not for achila, not for shtia, not for shina. But if you made your sukkah in Siberia, where it's very cold at night, and you know you're not going to be able to sleep in the sukkah at night because of mitzvah, you're still allowed to use your sukkah for achila during the day, and you're still yoitza. Why? Says the Mishnah Berurah, the efsher b'inyan acher, because you have no choice. And he brings this down from the Pri Megadim. The efsher b'inyan acher, umemela mikri sham ke'en taduru. You make a sukkah in Siberia, it's cold outside. It's not pshat that you made a deficient sukkah. You made the only sukkah that can be made in Siberia. In Siberia, that's what a sukkah is. If you like your house to be 72 degrees during the winter, and now you live in Siberia, guess what? You're going to have a house that's not 72 degrees. That's Siberia. A sukkah in Siberia is going to be cold at night. And also, we're still going to call it roy lishina because you can have heavy blankets. I would bring you again, and I keep doing this lately in this Siman, I would bring you back again to the Aruch HaShulchan, because I think the Aruch HaShulchan words this very beautifully. So I'm going to turn to the Aruch HaShulchan, Sif Ches, Siman Taf Reish Mem Sif Ches and Sif Tes. Says the Aruch HaShulchan like this. Like the Mechaber said, V'davke shebolo yatzar b'mikreh, this p'tur of mitzar is only when the tsar chanced upon you, achar she'asa sukkah, after you built the sukkah. Ubeshasha asa shama sukkah, when you made the sukkah where you made it, lo hayat tsar zeh, this tsar wasn't there. Aval also lasei sukkase lechatchila b'makom shesham yagia lo tsar, you can't make your sukkah initially in a place where you know you're going to be mitzar, mipnei aruach, because of the wind, or yareach, or because of an odor, or in a place where you know that there's a tremendous amount of insects, and you're going to be mitzar because of the insects. Guess what? Before Sukkot, go get bee traps. Before Sukkot, go inspect your backyard and see if there are any beehives, wasp nests, or yellow jacket nests, and get rid of them. If you know you have a beehive right outside of your sukkah, and you went ahead and you built your sukkah next to a beehive, knowing full well that when you sit down on Yom Tov, you're going to be mitzvah and you're going to leave the sukkah, that's a puzzle of sukkah. And you can't sleep in it at night when the bees aren't around. Because even for sleeping, it's a puzzle of sukkah, because it's a puzzle of sukkah. It's not Teshu Kain Taduru. The Yosim is that Kasav Rabbeinu Ramah, and this is what the Ramah says, V'sif Daled, the Oisim B'makim, because if you make a sukkah in such a place, ain't a sukkah klal, it's not a sukkah. Ve'ena Yotzeh B'yedei Chivasa, you can't be Yotzeh the Chiv of sukkah for anything. Not for Achila, not for Shtia, not for Shina. V'zeh L'shaynayim, these are the words of the Ramah. V'masam etchila b'makim shemitztar ba'achila b'shtia b'shina. If you made your sukkah mitchila in a place where you know you're going to be mitztar, either by achila or by shtia or by shina, by sleeping, or you know that you're not going to be able to do one of these primary functions of the sukkah. You know you're not going to be able to either eat in the sukkah, drink in the sukkah, or sleep in the sukkah. Because you're afraid of bad guys. You're not yoytze in that sukkah, even by the activities that tsar doesn't apply to. Why? Delay have it kain dira, because it's not a dira. Sheyachal called tzarchav. To be mekayim teshu kain taduru, you need to make a sukkah that you can use for all the primary functions. If you cannot use it for one of the primary functions, then the Ramah says it's not a sukkah. Now in Siftes says the Aruch HaShulchan, udvarav tzrichen biur. These words of the Ramah need a lot of biur. They need a lot of explanation. Why? Tim Kain, b'medinai sachamos, in the locales where it's excessively hot. Shemitzuyim sham zevuvim b'chamakim, where you have a terrible insect problem, the tropics, where you have a terrible problem of insects. Ulahepich, or the opposite, b'medinai sakaros, in the extremely cold climates. Shahakar gadol, where it's excessively cold. Ukemat mehanimnois lishan sham, where it's kemat not shaykh to sleep in the sukkah. So niftar es asveinu legarmi min sukkah. We should be pater from sukkah. In Siberia, there should be no chi of sukkah. Because what do you mean? I know full well that I'm building a sukkah where I'm not going to be able to sleep in the sukkah. It's going to go down to 35 below. I'm not going to be able to sleep in the sukkah. So that's not Teshu Kain Taduru. That sukkah should be a completely puzzle of sukkah. And anybody living in Siberia should be pater from sukkah. And the Aruch HaShulchan is not willing to accept that. He said it can't be. Rather inyan kain hu. Aruch HaShulchan says this is the way you have to approach it. This is the proper understanding. The HaTorah Amru Teshu Kain Taduru. The Rabbeinu Shalom, the Torah Dirshu tells you have to make a sukkah Teshu Kain Taduru, which means Shetihi HaSukkah Kibeisei V'dirasei. You have to treat the sukkah and you have to strive to make a sukkah like your house. V'davar Yadua, and it's well known, Sheha'adam She'oisa Lo Dira, when you go to make a house, Yechapes Achar HaMokam HaYoser Hagun. You find the best place to build the house that you can. If you have a choice and you could build the house in a place where it's more comfortable, or you could build the house in a place where it's less comfortable, you're going to choose the more comfortable place, right? That's what you're going to do. And that's what you have to do with the sukkah. Aval, however, If you live in Siberia, then there is no place that's not cold. If you live in Siberia and you want to build a cabin in Siberia, what are you going to do? You're going to try to find a place in a valley or sheltered by a hill or sheltered by a line of trees where your house is going to be afforded some protection from the elements. Yes, that's what you will try to do. So you will not choose to build your house on top of a hill where you're fully exposed to the elements. Rather, you will try to build your house in maybe a little bit of a valley where you are more sheltered from the elements. That's what you would do for your house, and that's what you're mechuyev to do for your sukkah. But if none of the places that you have a choice to build your house are good, everywhere in Siberia it's very cold at night, you're not escaping the cold, so you're going to make the best dira you can make. The same rule applies to the sukkah. If you live in Winnipeg, and in Winnipeg at night it's freezing cold, it doesn't matter where you make the sukkah. It's not pshat that you made the sukkah in a makam en a hagun. It's not pshat that you went ahead mitchila and you chose to make your sukkah in a place where you're going to be mitzvah. You live in Winnipeg. In Winnipeg it's freezing cold at night. And your house is in Winnipeg. And your house gets cold at night. So your house gets cold at night and your sukkah is going to get cold at night. That's the way it is. And in Winnipeg, you can't sleep in the sukkah at night because it's too cold. And guess what? We learned earlier, you're not mechuyev to insulate your sukkah, and you're not mechuyev to put a furnace in your sukkah to be mekayim teishu kein taduru. Because the Torah Kedusha tells you that you should make a sukkah diras haroi, not a diras kva. So over here, the halach of the Ramah doesn't apply. You're mechuyev to make the best sukkah you can make. But when you do have the opportunity to choose, if you have the opportunity to build a sukkah in a place where it's exposed to the wind, or where it's exposed to a bad odor, or it's exposed to insects, and you have another place where you could build the sukkah where you don't have those problems, so then you're mechuyev to make the sukkah in the better place. And if you go ahead and you choose to make the sukkah in the place where it's going to be exposed to the wind, to the odor, or to the insects, then lo yatsi yidei came to duru. That's when the Ramah's rule applies. The Ramah's rule that if you made the sukkah mitchila in an oifen where you're going to be mitzvah, that sukkah is not a sukkah, and you can't be yotze your chiyuv in any way in that sukkah, is when you had the choice not to do it. You could have made the sukkah in a better way. You have a backyard. Your backyard is surrounded by a fence. The fence has a lock. You have security cameras. Your kids could sleep in the sukkah at night if it's in the backyard, and you're not afraid of ganovim. You decided to make your sukkah in the front yard right off the street, and you know that there are homeless people that walk by in the middle of the night, and now you say, oh, can't sleep in the sukkah, it's dangerous. Well, what do you make it there for? You should have made it in the back. That's where you have a shiloh. Or here's another interesting shiloh. You have a choice. You can make the sukkah up on the roof. If you make the sukkah up on the roof of your building, it's going to be baking in the sun. Or you can make your sukkah downstairs behind the building in the shelter of the building. If you make it in the shelter of the building, the sukkah will be provided shade. You chose to make the sukkah up on the roof. Now you want to leave the sukkah. You say, I can't eat in the sukkah. I'm at star. It's 98 degrees and humid in the sukkah. Well, you made the sukkah in a place where it's going to be exposed to the sun and it's going to bake in the sun. So now you might have a shiloh. Maybe this Ramah kicks in. You made a sukkah that's not Teshu Kain Taduru. You chose to make the sukkah in a place where you're going to be mitzvah from Achila. You should have made it downstairs where it was protected, where it was afforded a certain amount of shade. You didn't do that. But if you live in a cold climate, you didn't choose to make the sukkah in a cold place. You live in a cold part of the earth. That's the way it is. So that's not going to passel the sukkah for everything else. Okay. Very yesodistic Ramah and a very yesodistic Mishnah Berurah. Ice cutting your test, the misyarim you list them aganovim. You made your sukkah in a place where you're afraid to sleep at night because you're afraid of robbers. Ritzaina Loimar, says the Chavetz Chaim, what the Ramah wants to say is, Sheyuchlu lahazikoi begufay. You're afraid of bad people who might bring you physical harm. Even if you're not afraid during the day, but you say, no, nobody can sleep in the sukkah at night, it's too dangerous. Still, you have a problem during the day because it's not a sukkah that's roy. If you're not afraid of physical harm, you're only afraid that they might break into your sukkah and steal things, then it's still a kosher sukkah, because you have an eitzah, take your kelim into the house. Now again, what would be if somebody lives in a bad neighborhood? Well, if somebody lives in a bad neighborhood, that's like somebody who lives in a bad climate. If you live in a bad neighborhood, you're worried in your house too. But you have no choice. You have to live. You have to live in a house. So you put a lock on the door. You do the best that you can. So by your sukkah, you make a sukkah. Don't make the sukkah out in front, right in the middle of the street, if you have an option. If you can make the sukkah in a discreet place in the back, make the sukkah in a discreet place in the back. If you tell me that your mamish still can't sleep in the sukkah because it's mamish dangerous, it's ma'aseh b'chol yom, that if you're exposed, people are mamish roaming the streets looking to hurt people, so then it doesn't mean you made a puzzle of sukkah, you did the best you could. The same way you did the best you could on your house, you did the best you could with the sukkah. If you made a sukkah where it's impossible to sleep in it because of its star, you're not yotzer the chiyuv even by eating. However, the Mishnah Berurah says, you should know there are those who take issue with this Ramah. The Daitam, in their opinion, is the after lechatchila bavade ein lasei sukkah kazu she'en yochel lekayim b'kol advarim kadin. Even though in a chinami, if at all possible, you should not make a sukkah where there's one of the primary functions of the sukkah that you cannot do because of mitzvah. It doesn't mean that you're not yotzeh the other chiyuvim. So here we have this very basic machlokes over here. This question, do we go with the Mordechai, that if your sukkah is not usable for one of the primary functions, then you can't be yotzeh the mitzvah of sukkah in that sukkah by any other of the functions either? So if it's a sukkah where you have a p'tur of mitzvah by sleeping, now you can't use that sukkah for eating either. That's what the Mordechai says. Or no, or do you go like the other sheet to hold that no, if you're mitzvah from sleeping, so fine, you're mitzvah from sleeping, but it's still a good sukkah for eating it. Okay, let's go weiter in the Ramah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 lines down in the Shulchan Aruch. Says the Ramah, Misha kavu loya nerois basukah b'Shabbos. Let's say you had nerois in the sukkah, and Friday night the nerois blew out, and now you can't light any more neros, and it's pitch black in the sukkah. V'yesh lo ner bebeisai. But in the house, you do have a ner. In the house, you have light. Mutter lotzeis min ha-sukkah k'dei lechel b'mkar ner. You're allowed to leave the sukkah to go inside to eat in a place where there's light. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois cotton chaf aleph mutter lotzeis. The derech b'nei adam li'tztar b'zeh, because it makes sense that you're mitzvah. Eating in the pitch black is mitzvah. So yes, that is a valid argument of mitzvah. Now let's go back to the Ramah, where the Ramah says, right by those chav beis for the Mishnah Berurah, ve'ein tzarich leileis l'sukas chaveroi sheyesh sham ner. Your neris went out in your sukkah, but your neighbor has a sukkah with neris. Are you mechuyev to go to your neighbor's sukkah? We said you're allowed to leave the sukkah because this is a legitimate mitzvah. You have no light in your sukkah, so you want to go into the house and you can eat in the dining room where you have an air. But your neighbor has a beautiful sukkah next door in the backyard, and it has neris, so maybe you're mechuyev to eat in your neighbor's sukkah. Says that Ramah, no. Ve'ein tzarich leileis l'sukas chaveroi sheyesh sham ner im yesh tarach gadol b'davar. If it's a big tercha for you to go to your neighbor's sukkah, then you're not mechuyev to. Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah is chav beis ve'ein tzarich leileis l'sukas chaveroi. You're not mechuyev to go to your friend's sukkah. Tahanami chashuv tzar. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the reason you're not mechuyev to go to your neighbor's sukkah is because that's also mitzvah. Why is that mitzvah? Because the eating of your suda is not pleasant to you unless you're eating in your own space. If you're eating in your neighbor's sukkah, that's not pleasant. That's mitzvah, and that's a p'tur. Mitzvah of pater b'na sukkah. But, says the Mishnah Berurah, Obalayla Harishayna, Sarach l'trayach v'leilach l'sukkahs chaveroi. If it would be the first night, so remember the Ramah's opinion that there is no p'tur of mitzvah on the first night. That's why we eat in the sukkah on the first night in the rain. There's no p'tur of mitzvah. So on the first night, yes, you would have to go to your friend's sukkah, ach lo yavarach sham, but you don't make a leishev, just as we said by the rain. Unless you're talking not mitzvah by eating in your neighbor's sukkah. The Chayyodim says this is not such a mitzvah, and you shouldn't be so mitzvah, and you should be able to even make a leisha b'sukkah. Ois Katan Chav Gimel. The Mishnah Berurah says, Mishnah Berurah points out that the wording of the Ramah was very interesting. The Ramah said you're not mechuyev to go to your neighbor's sukkah im yesh loy tarach gadol, if it's a big tircha for you to go to your neighbor, tarach gadol badavar. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Chav Gimel, im yesh loy tarach gadol. When are you potter? If it's going to be a big tircha. That's when you're exempt from going to your neighbor's sukkah. Says the Chavetz Chaim, mipnei shesvara azu deleilich l'sukkahs chavera yesh tsar badavar, loy psika lei kol kach. The Ramah was not so happy with this idea that there's a p'tur of mitzvah because it's such a mitzvah to go to your neighbor's sukkah. What's the big deal? So you go to your neighbor's sukkah. Your neighbor's going to understand. Your neighbor's went out. He wants to help you be mekayim the mitzvah. So what's the big mitzvah in going to the neighbor's sukkah? Lochein, for that reason, tala hadavar be'im yesh torah gadol b'zeh. That's why the Ramah wrote these words that you're potter if it's a torah gadol. If it's not a tircha gedol, if it's not a big bother, you should go to your neighbor's sukkah if he has an heir. V'chein, similarly, and this is a case that I could see happening, im yardu gishamim upasku. Let's say it was raining, and now the rain stopped. Umikam makam adayin noitif min ha'ilanois, but your schach is still dripping. Mina Yilonos from the trees over here means the tree branches that you used for schach on your sukkah. So it was raining. Now it stopped raining. It's not raining anymore outside. It mamish cleared up. It's beautiful outside. But your schach is still dripping. So you can't eat in your sukkah because your schach is dripping. But v'yesh chaveroi sukkah, but your friend has a sukkah, im gag with a shlak, ha'asor lekach liskar v'leftayach. Your friend has a shlak. So your friend opens up his shlak now after the rain stopped, and his sukkah is beautifully dry. So his sukkah is fine. Your sukkah is a problem. Tzarich leilech l'sukkahs chaveroi, you have to go use your friend's sukkah. Im eloi tarach gadol b'davar. If it's not a tircha gedola, you have to use your friend's sukkah. Chavdalad b'davar. Unless there's a tarach gadol b'davar. What does that mean? Hainu b'shas achila. Says the Mishnah Berurah, this means that there's going to be a tarach gadol when you sit down to eat in the sukkah. Aval pshita, afilu misha eila maka b'chatzerei livnei sloi sukkah. Let's say somebody would want to make the following argument. He says, I'm potter from sukkah. You know why I'm potter from sukkah? I don't have a good place to build a sukkah. I don't have a place. Ein maka b'chatzerei livnei sloi sukkah. I don't have a yard with a place to make a sukkah, and I have a pitched roof, so I can't make a sukkah on my roof. So I don't have a place to make a sukkah. And I don't want to go to my friend's sukkah. I'm mitzvah. I don't want to go to my friend's sukkah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no way. Avo pshit, it's obvious. Afilu misha ein loy makam b'chatzer livnei sloi sukkah shetzarich lahamsi loy makam livnei sloi sukkah. He has to find a place where he can make a sukkah. V'oz sham beisai. Teishku came to Duru. You don't say, I don't have a place to build a house. Okay, I'm going to sleep in the street. No, you get yourself a house. You get yourself a shelter. You find yourself an apartment. If you don't have a place in your chutzner to build a sukkah, you got to find a place to build a sukkah. Kederach shegam kol hashana v'gil mufteis v'bayizeh l'bayizeh v'os sham beisai. Agos chasam sefer v'chein kasav b'kur Yaakov b'pshitos. Okay, I was hoping to go a little bit weiter, but I think we're going to stop over here. Thank you so much for joining me for Liman HaTorah. The schus of Liman HaTorah should be made against Klal Yisrael. The Rosh should send Yeshua's for Refuah's Parnasa and Shidduchim to all those in need. And we should be zeichet to see the BS Girl Tzedek B'meher V'yameinu. Amen. Be well.